Hello everybody, my name is John Mark Johnson Jr. I'm the host of Reformed GGA, and today I'm going to keep a promise by making a third and most likely final video on the MCK, that is the microconversion kit, from CAA USA. This little BC right here we're going to visit one more time. Now, in previous videos, we've already talked about things like compatibility with various handgun types and which ones seem to work best and which ones don't. We've talked about accuracy issues and those kinds of things in previous videos, so we're not going to rehash any of that here. Instead, we're just going to focus on getting your pistol inside of this chassis. Now, it should be noted, of course, that I am not a representative for CAA USA in any way, shape, or form, so take everything that I say with a grain of salt. This is not meant to be legal advice of any kind. It is not meant to represent what CAA would recommend in any way, shape, or form. I'm just sharing my experiences. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, when you take this thing out of the box, of course, it isn't going to have the red dot attached, at least for normal purchasers, and it's not going to have these little thumb rests attached. So let's talk about those real quickly, because a lot of people are going to want to get something like that on there. When it comes to the red dots, we found, because it was myself and a couple other people that were helping me test these, and we actually had a few of them in play. Altogether, we wound up with 4 of these things. One of them failed pretty much immediately, and so it had to be replaced early on. It was originally just supposed to be 3 that we were testing, but we wound up with 4 because 1 did not work well. See previous videos for details on that. But that being said, what we found in our testing is that anything that was mounted on the 1913 rail next to this ejection port could potentially cause issues depending on the particular handgun used. Sometimes it would be an issue, sometimes it wouldn't be. It just depends, and so if you want to be safe regarding that and not have to, kind of test it in the field, what we found that seems to work is to mount your red dots either forward of that ejection port or behind it. We seem to find that mounting it forward tended to work the best, which is what you would normally expect with most, weapon setups. It's usually a little bit better forward than aft if you have something with infinite eye relief, and this is no different. So we would generally recommend that if you're going to put a red dot on it, basically put it on the forward part of the gun, but as far back as you can get without getting to that ejection port to keep it semi-close to a normal position for a red dot. And then as to the little thumb rests, they are kind of interesting. They have a little locking tab underneath that fits into the little rails on the side. And so you just, what we would recommend is sliding it on from the front and then pulling out on that little tab until you get to the position that you want it in. And then that should snap into place just fine, and it provides a really nice place for you to put your thumb. So that's not overly difficult to install. Another thing that will usually not come pre-installed is the charging handle. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Get to the door in a little bit, but these charging handles are usually not installed. They don't come installed, I should say. So go ahead and work that out. They usually come like this. They'll come separately, and we found that on some of the models, particularly the Taurus G3C models, they actually had to be modified a little bit. And it's going to vary depending on the model. Most of them will not, at least in our experience, most of them will not need modification. But on the G3C model, what we found out is that the back of the charging handle actually protruded forward a little too far, so we just took a Dremel and took out a little bit of that material until the gun slid into the charging handle properly. And it's a good idea before you install the charging handle to go ahead and test it on your gun. This has already been checked and cleared off of camera. This is my CZ P-09, easily one of my favorite handguns, and works very well in this particular setup. What we found is that basically large handguns with some kind of a rail system underneath the barrel, with
some kind of a large muzzle device on the end. This is a linear compensator. It's not a silencer, although a silencer would work if you have one of those in your position that the ATF is so graciously allowed you to have. But this is just a linear compensator, but it will basically do the same thing. This is basically what we found works best, is this particular model. Of the models that we tried, and anything that would be similar to this we would assume would have similar results. But to test and make sure that it fits correctly, you just put the charging handle over the end, and you'll see this little striation in the charging handle, and you'll notice that your charging handle will also have little striations on it, and that striation that's on the charging handle needs basically to match up with the last striation on the frame of the gun. So we're just going to go ahead and match those up, and then we're going to push down. And on different guns it will push down to different degrees. Some people get really concerned if they see a gap here, and that's actually not what's important, not the gap here. Instead, the gap that's important is the one on the top. As long as there's no gap up here, that is the charging handle is flush with the slide, it's good to go. If you happen to have a gap on the side, that's actually okay, that's just fine. What matters is whether or not the slide is pushed all the way up into the charging handle. As long as the top of the slide is flush with the charging handle, you're good to go and it works properly. So we know that the charging handle fits. It's a little bit of a snug fit, but not too bad. And we also found that guns like the CZ P-09 that have very aggressive striations, very deep cuts, they tend to work best with these plastic charging handles. CAA does sell extra charging handles should you need them, but like we said, they tend to last the longest with the guns that have those really deep cuts. All right. And so after you make sure that yours fits your gun, I'm basically just going to put it in sideways, and you're going to try to twist it around so that the charging handle part of it is of course back and the open side is down. So side, okay, get that edge in there and twist that around, and there we go. That is proper. Okay. And there's actually a little ledge that it can sit on up there that'll kind of hold it up a little bit. But depending on how you wiggle it and how far forward you go, it'll kind of pop down sometimes. But that's not an overly big deal. So yeah, I can get it to hang down, but there are a couple of ledges up there that'll kind of rest on. Alright, so there is that. Depending on how yours comes, it'll probably come with the loading gate closed. And to open the loading gate is fairly simple. There's a button back here, you push, and then this little ledge you push back. So do that again, push button down, push ledge back. Okay, push button down, push ledge back, and then the loading gate opens up. All right, so that is not too terribly complicated. The big thing that is going to be an issue is the forward section here. Let me go ahead and take off this thumb rest, because underneath it are some important things. You'll notice 3 screw holes. These 2 rearward screw holes are for different sizes of slide. Most of the MCKs, I don't think all of them, but most of the MCKs are designed such that you can fit 2 different slide lengths in that particular model. This one was designed for the CZ P-07 and this P-09. The P-09 is larger, and because of that you have to make the inside of the MCK a little bit larger, and that's what you do with these first 2 screws. The screws are not in here, of course, because the way that I have it set up, it doesn't use them. But what you would normally do is, if you have a long slide version of whatever thing you're working with, you would take out the screw in this back spot, and there's going to be a corresponding one on the other side. But you take the screw out of the back spot, and then you would pull forward on this little barrel shroud until, oops, pull a little too far forward, until a model number pops out. And this is the P-09. Which is the large version of the CZ P-07, P-09 dichotomy. Between those two, the P-09 is the larger one. So to make it capable of accepting the larger one, you actually have to pull the shroud out, and then you would stick the screw that was in the back hole
into the front hole, and you would do the same thing on the other side. That is if you have a normal gun. A normal gun that does not have a threaded barrel, that does not have a linear compensator hanging off the end like I do. If you do want to hang something off the end like a linear compensator or a silencer or something like that, you're actually going to need to get rid of this thing altogether. And that's where the other front screw comes into play. If you need to take this out entirely so that you can put your linear compensator in or your silencer in or whatever the case happens to be, you take out both screws, the one that's going to be in the 1913 rail and the one that's on the 4-place, and you basically just keep pulling forward until the whole assembly comes out. And this whole assembly is rather an interesting little deal, so hopefully you can kind of sort of see in there. It's not anything overly advanced, it's just a shroud that fits around the front end of the gun and helps contain some of that blast and push it forward and not inside of a plastic frame. Now, that being said, this is not an overly strong piece. The shroud itself, as far as I can tell, it's just aluminum and it's not steel. So this is definitely not meant to be used with rifle calibers at all. This is definitely a pistol caliber type thing. But that is basically their safety device for keeping everything blowing forward instead of, you know, out the sides of the plastic. Alright, so that is all that is. If you have a shorter barreled gun, it's going to be kind of recessed in like that. If you have one of the long versions, you'll take out the screw that I talked about, move it until you can actually see the model number of the larger version there. And of course, if you're going to use a silencer, linear compensator, something like that on a threaded barrel, you just take out the whole assembly like we just did here. So take it all the way out. Alright, and so now that we have it all the way out, we can actually talk about getting the gun in there. If you do not have a linear compensator or suppressor or something like that on the end of your gun, and you have a threaded barrel version, you'll actually still need to take this out, and you'll actually need to go out and get a compensator or a suppressor or something like that, because these are not designed to work with normal threaded barrel firearms that don't actually have something attached to that threaded barrel. Now, we found that with some of the models, if you take the thread protector off of the threaded barrel, sometimes it works, but it's not consistent. And if it doesn't happen to work, what will happen is you'll actually, the little shroud that's in there, if you leave that on with a threaded barrel, the threaded barrel could get caught up on that. It'll scratch the inside of the little shroud. It'll also scratch up the barrel, and it can actually damage some things. So if you have a threaded barrel, the safe way to go is to actually put a compensator on it or suppressor or something like that and do like I'm doing here. But if you have a non-threaded barrel, then using this in either the short position or the long position, depending on the length of your slide, that would be the way to go. Alright, so get your front end configured however it needs to be, either with the shroud in, the shroud out, or just take the whole thing out completely like I did. For whatever would be appropriate for your gun, and then we can talk about installing it. What's going to happen is kind of a multi-part process. You're first going to slide the gun into the charging handle, and then after we get it into the charging handle properly seated, we're going to push it forward while pulling down on these two front tabs. On some of the MCKs, instead of pulling down on the front tabs, you actually push on them. We found that MCKs that have that feature don't tend to hold the guns very well. Just FYI, just a warning on that one. Those ones do not tend to be as secure. So if you can, get one of the ones that have the downward tab, and those coincide with the guns that have some kind of a rail underneath the barrel. Those tend to be much more secure. All right, so like I said, we're going to push the gun into the charging handle first, then we're going to slide forward while holding down on this tab. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. Now, if you're like me, and you have something attached to your threaded barrel, because otherwise you can't really use threaded barrels in these things, you'll need to take whatever that extra device is off in most cases. I haven't seen too many cases where whatever you have attached to the threaded barrel actually fits in particularly well, at least if it's of a decent size. Alright, so take that off first. Alright, then kind of ease it in there, and the main thing that we're worried about doing is getting that charging handle lined up with the striations on the gun. There we go. And I'm going to move it forward just a little bit. I haven't slid it all the way forward, but just a little bit so that I can see the top of the charging handle and the slide and make sure that those are actually touching, that the charging handle is actually all the way down on the top of the slide. Like I said, the side of the charging handle in the gun, if there's a gap there, that doesn't matter at all. That's not what's important. What is important is the top of the charging handle and the top of the slide. As long as those are flush, you're good to go. Alright, so now that we have that in and proper, I'm going to pull down on those front tabs while pushing the gun forward into place. It will kind of sort of find a resting place that you can't push forward anymore on. Go ahead and release the tabs, and it shouldn't come out. You'll have a little bit of wiggle, but it's not going to want to come out. To tighten it up the rest of the way, you're going to close the loading gate until there's a little bit of a click, and then push forward on the gates until it snaps into place. So let's go ahead and do that again. So down, a light snap, push forward, be a much stronger snap into place. Alright, and if you have one of the versions that will work with the muzzle shroud in place, you're basically done. If you have a threaded barrel, you'll need something to go in there so that the explosion isn't into plastic, it's actually into something that can handle it. So I'm going to go ahead and thread on the muzzle device here. Like I said, this is just a linear compensator, it's nothing overly fancy, but it does push all that blast forward of the MCK, and it also keeps the interior of the MCK much cleaner. If you're really dedicated to these things and plan on running them a lot, be aware of the fact that they will get your gun very dirty, and the inside of these things gets very dirty if you're using one of the versions that has the shroud on it, because all that blast gets caked in there rather well. And so, yeah, that is rather dirty. Using some kind of a muzzle device to push everything forward will help keep things much cleaner. Alright, so we can go ahead and run the charging handle just to check function. All that looks good. You will have an opening on the appropriate side for your gun for controls. They're not super great place. They kind of push down on you just a little bit, so you're not able to get quite as high as you used to, and you're also not going to be able to get your hand quite as high as you used to, but overall, not bad. Alright, so that is in, and then out is basically just the reverse process. If you have something that has a muzzle device on it, you'll of course unscrew that. Of course, if you've been shooting, you're going to want to wait for it to cool down before taking it off, of course, and of course make sure that the gun is clear before you take it apart. Okay, so handle that first, and then we'll take the loading gates off first. So press the button and then push back on the gates, and that will allow it to spring up. And then once it has sprung up, then we're going to be able to pull it out, but remember to pull down on the front tabs. You can pull it back, and then it should slide relatively easily out of the charging handle, and the gun is out. Alright, so that's what the process of putting the gun into the MCK and taking it out looks like. Obviously, this is not going to be applicable to everybody. A lot of people will probably having something that doesn't have a threaded barrel, so they will use the shroud, whereas I did not. But like I said, I recommend, if it's something that you plan on running a lot, to get something with some kind of a muzzle device on the end, because otherwise cleaning the inside of those things is rather annoying. This one that we're dealing with here is the Gen 2 version of the MCK. They are supposed to have, I think, a 3rd generation out now, where you actually can use a red dot that is mounted to the slide on the handgun instead of using a separate red dot. And those ones are supposed to fix a lot of the accuracy issues that you get with the Gen 1s and the Gen 2s. So that might be worth looking into. I haven't messed with them. None of the people I know have messed with them. So I can't really comment on whether those do or do not work. But this is what we found with the models that we are familiar with. All right. Thank you all very much for your time and attention. For those of you who are in Christ, go with God and be blessed. For those of you who are not, I pray that you would come to know the true Christ of history, the only genuine Savior of mankind. Amen.